So Lance DeHaven-Smith joins us. We appreciate him coming on. DeHaven-Smith.com is his website, and he's the School of Public Administration Policy at Florida State University, former president of the Florida Political Science Association. He's got peer-reviewed journals. DeHaven-Smith coined the term state crimes against democracy to name the type of crime the conspiracy theory labeled dangerous for us speaking. Well, I think that's outrageous. Anybody that thinks government ever does anything wrong or corporations is obviously quite mad. Would you like to apologize, sir, for your heresy here on air up front?
I understand what you're saying. It's really quite amazing that this attitude has taken hold in the United States. We're a country with a long history of being skeptical and suspicious and worried about conspiracies against the people's liberties and interests. And to suddenly, and this happens really basically after World War II, we have this conspiracy theory label that smears anybody who raises any suspicions about elite political criminality. There's a famous historian in the United States, he's no longer alive, Charles Beard, who is the only historian to be elected president of both the American Historical Society and the American Political Science Association. And he basically said, well, what history is uncovering conspiracies. So that was the key to it. And he was well known in the early 1900s because he had argued that the American Constitution basically protected the interest of the people who had written it, and that, in effect, they had conspired to develop a government that served their interests. He had a theory about World War II. He said that President Roosevelt knew that Pearl Harbor was going to happen, knew when it was going to happen, and failed to warn the military commanders in the Pacific because he wanted to mobilize American outrage to enter World War II. The book was a bestseller for 3 months. It received a lot of notoriety, but it's basically been airbrushed out of American history. If you go and look in the American Political Science Review, it is mentioned one time when the book first came out. It's never mentioned again. What I did that woke me up, I was a regular college professor. I saw the 2000 election in Florida being stolen by the people who were responsible for administering the system, and that shocked me, and I was shocked that it was not investigated after the election, and I was shocked that it was just buried, basically. Once I was kind of shocked by that, I did something, and I just simply wrote a list of all of the assassinations and defense failures and economic problems and bioterrorism attacks and faulty intelligence, and I just made this list. It was about 15 or 20 of these crimes, and there wasn't a name for these. The founders had called them high crime, but that has kind of dropped out. I think it's a very good term, but if you think about it, we have names for juvenile crime, white-collar crime, hate crime, and yet for these very serious, grave crimes against the organizing principles of our democracy, we don't have a name. We call them conspiracy theories if you have a theory about what we don't have a name. So I did this list, and I was shocked. I had grown up when President Kennedy was killed, and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Robert Kennedy and George Wallace was attacked, and Ronald Reagan was shot. I knew all this, but I had never sat down and just looked at a list of them. And once you do that, you see that it's a very common occurrence. So you have the assassinations, you have these defense failures or provocations, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, 9/11, these inexplicable defense failures, and you have the government cleaning up these events. The limousine that President Kennedy was in was washed while it was still at Parkland Hospital. The debris in 9/11 was cleaned up immediately and shipped to China. The agency responsible for investigating the collapse of the buildings in New York did not look for evidence of incendiaries and explosives. I mean, this is a malfeasance in government. This should be a crime, and we should bring these people into court and prosecute them for failure to do their job. The other thing that was shocking me, so I looked at all these things. Half the elections since World War II have had a major problem, and that includes the assassination of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the October surprise of 1968 when Nixon derailed the peace talks with Vietnam, the 1972 shooting of George Wallace, the 1980 October surprise, Iran-Contra, and the list goes on. And of course, most recently 9/11 and the anthrax letter attacks. One of the things that I urge people to do is not to look at these events one by one. The conspiracy theory label tends to have you look at what's the theory of this crime and what's the theory of that crime, and you need to look at them together to see the connections. The conspiracy theory label is applied very selectively by the political class. They focus on the amateurs investigating the Kennedy assassination and ridicule them, but then when we have real conspiracies like lying us into war in Iraq that cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, that is not viewed as a conspiracy theory, and yet those are the conspiracy theories that are really dangerous. It's the elite conspiracy theories. The other thing I was going to say, the failure to look at these events together is different from how we would look at ordinary crimes. If a guy married a wealthy woman and she fell in the bathtub and died, we would be suspicious because it's an improbable event and he benefited. If he married again and had another wife die under an accidental thing like that, we would really be suspicious. We'd investigate him, we'd dig up the bodies, we would control the crime scene, we'd have all these forensic people in. But when it comes to something like an assassination or a 9/11 defense failure or an anthrax letter attack, we literally destroy the evidence. The 9/11 debris is shipped out. The anthrax letter attacks, there was an inventory of anthrax at Iowa University that was destroyed right after the anthrax letter attack. Part of what's going on is what we need to do is apply ordinary forensic techniques and investigative techniques to these high crimes. And we should bring these people in and interrogate them and tell the people at the bottom we'll let them get a lighter sentence if they'll confess about the higher-ups. I mean, this is the way we handle ordinary crime. If we did that with these state crimes, with these government crimes, we could solve them. We wouldn't be sitting here 50 years after the Kennedy assassination wondering who did it. The another thing about the conspiracy theory label is it forces us who have these suspicions to be expected to have a complete, full-blown theory. We're supposed to solve the Kennedy assassination. We're supposed to solve 9/11. And if we can't do that, then our ideas are no good. But the reality is we don't have subpoena power. We don't have all these millions of dollars of forensic experts and techniques. The people who are supposed to solve these crimes are the government. Now, that's the problem. The government is the criminal and the government is the investigator. So we have this built-in conflict of interest, and we have to figure out ways to deal with that. Now, what the founders said was, let's pit the elites against each other. And that worked pretty well. I mean, we had a lot of investigations. Aaron Burr was tried for treason. Andrew Jackson complained about the corrupt bargain and then was elected president 4 years later. Abraham Lincoln complained that President Polk had lied us into the Mexican-American War. So we had elites fighting with each other and checking each other and challenging each other until World War II. And then what happened is the political class as a whole began to lock arms and defend itself as a group against suspicions. To me, it's a shocking thing to see Americans accept all this. When, it's not like, I say it's obscure and hard to solve, but a lot of this is just so blatant. I mean, think about it. President Kennedy is shot by a mediocre rifleman who gets all 3 lucky shots and hits him twice, and the governor gets wounds all over his body, and they arrest the guy and they interrogate him for 2 days, and they don't take notes and they don't record it. There is, I call it the conspiracy theory taboo. There is a strong, a powerful set of norms in the political class that prohibits any comment that suggests elite political criminality or conspiracy or suspicion. Think about this. The Kennedy family never talked about President Kennedy being assassinated, never raised questions about it. We have books out now that have interviewed Robert Kennedy and friends of Robert Kennedy, and that we realize now, well, they were afraid. These are obvious events. Think of 9/11. These buildings, 110 stories high, collapsed in 10 seconds into their own footprints. And you got the Building 7 that obviously controlled demolition. Yes, you can see this. I mean, the reality is we're dealing with a very sinister set of forces that are willing. Taking a life is a small matter in this arena. And I think the elites understand that. I think these are basically open secrets that they generally know. I mean, these people are not stupid. They know that this is certainly something very...
Stay there.
Yes. The left surprises me. This comes out of a liberal tradition, a socialist tradition, a very questioning tradition. And yet people that are very well-known journalists on the left will not touch the idea of elite political criminality. They don't want to be labeled a conspiracy theorist. I can't help but believe in private they recognize this stuff. I mean, you have to be an idiot not to see some of this. Although the electorate is well indoctrinated to close their eyes to this. So I don't mean to say that, everybody should realize all of this straightforward. It took me a while to figure it out. And you were saying, is there an awakening? I think there is. The conspiracies or the coincidences keep piling up. And that's the problem. You had the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination. My colleagues in political science say that if they let any doubts grow about President Kennedy as that possibly being a conspiracy, then it raises all kinds of questions about Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King and George Wallace. I think of it, we jokingly say, it's like telling a child there is no Santa Claus. The first thing the kid says is, oh my goodness, then there's no Easter rabbit, there's no tooth fairy. I mean, the whole thing collapses. So I think what we're going to witness with the Kennedy assassination anniversary is an enormous effort to keep the lid on. Napoleon had a comment. He said that it was not necessary to prevent the truth from coming out forever, just to prevent it for as long as it mattered. In 1997, we had a tape released of Lyndon Johnson talking to Everett Dirksen about Nixon undermining the peace talks in 1968. And Johnson said, this is treason, but I'm not going to tell the American people because it would destroy their confidence in the system of government. So I think what you have, when this comes out in 97, it's news for one day. Nobody goes back and says, geez, they stole the 1968 election. Nixon was, people don't realize this, he was pardoned for every crime he might have committed. Not for every committed. They didn't know what all crimes he had, so they put in the pardon any crimes he might have committed. I mean, it's like a blank check. And I think there's a psychological warfare going on where they want us, I mean, this sounds a little weird, but they want us to know they're behind some of these events. It's too obvious, but what that does is so demoralizing. I mean, the buildings fall in 9/11, the anthrax letters come out, nobody can solve this crime. Kennedy, we can't solve. What does that tell people? That tells people we are going to do these things, and there isn't a darn thing you can do about it.
Exactly.
That's the crazy thing, is that the elite, the political class, obviously our institutions are failing. They are being corrupted, and it's not just government, it's economic, it's financial. Priests are pedophiles. I mean, we're talking, we got serious problems throughout. And the elites act as if this, they can just continue with impunity and not hold anybody accountable, and that this is not going to unravel. But I mean, what it does is it puts the burden on the American people to stand up and take back their democracy. And until they're willing to do that, we're going to keep drifting like this, and the elites are going to continue to bail out the banks and not the homeowners, and pardon the criminals at the top and prosecute the people at the bottom.
Well, I think you've hit it here, Professor, and it's that you've got a system where the upper political class became bulletproof politically because of media aiding them, and then the lower political class, and now even just general criminals, people can't believe that a priest or somebody can be doing something bad, or Sandusky, until it creates a culture of just rolling over to corruption and denying it until it takes over the society, and then the society collapses. And I think that's a whole nother book in and of itself. Sir, I want to thank you for coming on. Great job with the book, Conspiracy Theory in America. Lance DeHaven-Smith, take care. We'll be talking to you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, powerful interview, folks. And he really gets it as a historian.